Hey everybody, my name is Ramon Mejia. This is the first episode of the LitRPG Podcast. This is kind of a new thing for me. I currently also do another podcast called Geek Bites Podcast, and that one I'm a little familiar with, but this one has been roaming around my brain for a little while. So we thought we'd kick it off with a special first episode, letting you know what the podcast is going to be about, and also what LitRPG is in general. If you're not sure what LitRPG is, that's a great question. LitRPG, or literary RPG, is an amazing new genre of fiction that sets stories in game worlds that explicitly describe the game mechanics around the world. Now, that's kind of a technical explanation. Basically, they're fun, addictive adventure stories where characters level up, they gain skills in this gamified world. If you've ever played a video game recently, or an RPG, or a tabletop RPG, any of that stuff, imagine a fictional story set in that kind of world where you actually get to see the rules, like damage notifications or level up notifications or experience point notifications within the text. So you actually see what's happening behind the scenes of the game world, and it kind of, for me personally, kind of makes me feel like I'm there and that this is a world that I can understand, which a lot of us feel like the real world isn't quite that way, which is part of the appeal to me. I got to say, I've read hundreds of these books, LitRPG books. We have a whole recommendation list on our website at LitRPGPodcast.com, where, and I can't get enough of them personally. I love them all, and I want more and more and more. Now, onto the part of the podcast. This podcast is really for the LitRPG fans, for those who are interested in the genre, and for people who love great stories in general. I plan to do reviews of LitRPG stories, of news articles that are related to the genre, release dates from authors when they plan to actually set out their new book, which is always fun for the readers of these kind of stories, and also author interviews. We've done plenty of author interviews on the Geek Bites podcast section for LitRPG authors, and we're just bringing them over to this podcast instead, since they're a little more theme appropriate at this point. We'll also be releasing some of the older author interviews if you've not heard them. That way you can kind of catch up on some of the big names within the genre. And now this is a very new format for me, so I'm always open to suggestions. If you have any suggestions for the format, please feel free to email me at litrpgpodcast@gmail.com. And we're going to move on to some of the top stories in the LitRPG world. Now, the big story, of course, right now is DragonCon is happening in Atlanta. Now, this is tangentially related to our genre because of Aleron Kong. He's actually, right now, as I'm recording this, throwing the LitRPG Gala in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm very jealous of anybody who's been able to go. Now, if you don't know Aleron Kong, he is the American father of LitRPG, and he was nice enough to organize a kind of LitRPG meetup for people who are interested in the genre, who were going to DragonCon anyways. He's like, hey, let's get together at this bar, and have a great time and food, and we'll invite some great cosplayers over, and we're going to have a great time. And actually started a Kickstarter, raised over $3,000 from fans of the genre, and they're happening right now. They're drinking, they're eating, they're getting crazy, they're taking photos with cosplayers, and actually meeting some of the American authors of LitRPG who were able to make it to that little meetup, including Aleron himself. They're doing author signings, all that great stuff. So if you happen to be in the Atlanta area for DragonCon, I encourage you to go stop by the LitRPG Gala at SIDEBAR ATLANTA, 79 Poplar St. Say hello to Aleron for me. Take some pictures and send them to us at litrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Now, next set of news in the LitRPG genre. The first annual Wizards and Warriors Choice Awards, which are some LitRPG awards, have actually finalized. They did voting over the last couple weeks. The tallies are in, folks, and here are the award winners. This is the very first time, again, that awards have been given out for the LitRPG genre. The first award is the Aspirant Award, which is given to the best online-only or non-published novel that's in LitRPG, and the award winner is Luke Chimilenko for Ascend Online. We talked to him before. He's a great guy. I love his story. super awesome. He actually tried to enter a contest for the Nerdist on Inkshare, which is where we talked to him about in our interview for him. But he's continuing to write, even though he didn't win, and he's a fan favorite. And he says he hopes to publish very soon on Amazon, so you can actually read his full story on Amazon in the near future. Now, the next story is going to be the Noob Award, given to the best new lit RPG novel for this year, 2016, and that award went to Travis Bagwell for Awaken Online. We talked to him as well. An amazing story about a video game world, zombies, explosions. It's a slightly darker story than a lot of lit RPG stories, but he's a great guy, and he has an amazing story. He also actually won the Warrior Award for best overall novel in total for all the RPGs ever written. He actually won for the best novel. So great on him. That kind of shows you what quality the fans think of his work. Now, the last award was the Wizard Award for best overall series in the genre. And this went to Vasily Maharenko for his series, The Way of the Shaman. He is a highly popular writer in Russia. He has, I believe, 7 books in total written in Russian, and they're being translated slowly into English, and we're wishing that they go faster. And we talked to him as well with author interviews at our website for him as well. And he's currently released his 3rd book in English for that series here. But he's seriously a fan of her. For a lot of people in the genre, his book is what drew them into lit RPG. His first novel, which is Survival, it's set in the far future where his character is imprisoned in a virtual reality prison in a mind where he has to live and survive. And it's a really interesting story. I encourage you to go check it out as well. But those are the winners of the first annual Wizards and Warrior Choice Awards. We're going to bring you more news as it happens in the genre. But that's going to be it for the news section. Now, for some new releases that have occurred basically in the last few weeks, End Online Volume 6 is out right now. I haven't read it yet. It really just came out a couple days ago, so I encourage you to go grab that one. Making the Grade Omnia Online Series Book 2 literally just hit today. So that's on Amazon. We're going to have, again, links for anything we're talking about as far as books go in the show notes, so I encourage you to click on that stuff if you're interested in grabbing it. Also, Man-Made Monsters, The Permadeath Legacy, Book 5 has come out this last couple weeks. It is the 5th book in the Permadeath Legacy series. This is a series of short stories that are set in the same game world, but they don't necessarily connect. They're written by 2 particular authors whose names escape me off the top of my head, but they're usually short stories, about 100 words or less, usually about 80-ish. Their price tag on Amazon is slightly expensive. But if you get them in the first week that they're released, they're a little more reasonable. But they're also on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have Kindle Unlimited, that's the only way I'd recommend you reading them in general. This last book, number 5, was not really lit RPG-ish to me. I'm also going to be doing reviews at the same time, so just bear with me. So again, we're getting the format set up. Man-Made is a detective story set in VR, but it doesn't really feel lit RPG-ish, so I can't wholeheartedly recommend this particular story in the series, but the other short stories are really good and interesting. I especially love the one set in a gladiatorial coliseum. It felt very cool. And those are a little more lit RPG-ish because they give you level up notifications. The characters progress more. This one is just kind of a detective story in VR, which is not the same thing. But go check it out if you're a fan of the series. We're letting you know that it is out now. Also, Probing the Annis, Caverns and Creatures story. The author of the series also has a whole another full set of like large lit RPG stories where gamers are sent into a tabletop RPG world. Look up Caverns and Creatures. They're super fun and funny and irreverent and kind of potty mouth, so be aware of that in the stories. But the author was nice enough to put out on a semi-regular basis at the point some short stories, again less than 100 words, set in the same universe with the same characters, and they're just kind of like nice little, tidbits of fun stories. They're always worth the price tag. As far as like page-wise, maybe not so much, but they're also on Kindle Unlimited, so go read them. They're always funny. Resurgence, The Rise of Resurgence Book 1. Now, this came out this month. I should say the past 30 days. It's a nice series on Amazon. It's the author's, I think, first book on Amazon. The synopsis is kind of this. Alex gets a paid beta testing position playing a revolutionary, realistic, full immersion video game called Resurgence, only not everything is as it seems. He has a much longer summary, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. In my opinion, this is my review of the story. I've actually read it. It's pretty awesome. I almost didn't finish it or start it, though, because it has a very slow start. It takes about 7 chapters until you actually get into the game world. And a lot of that's not quite necessary, in my opinion. I prefer just jumping in to the story. The setup it's appropriate to the story. It just takes a little while to get there. And so for a lot of readers, I think that long setup might put them off. But I encourage you to push through it. The story is definitely worth it. It's one of my favorites now. It's not just because it feels more like a buddy adventure story than just one character, Alex. In this game world, he actually has a group of players that he goes gaming with. And the banter between the characters is probably the highlight of the book. It's just fun and funny. They have a good time playing like an MMO. If you've ever played a real MMO or played a tabletop game with your friends, this is the vibe you get. That banter between each other, the jokes you play, the knocking each other on, going on adventures, that kind of stuff. That's the core of the story, and it's a super great, delightful read. The behind the scenes VR weird thing doesn't really happen to the end of the story, but it's a great fun journey anyways. So I definitely encourage you to recommend it. It's a big recommend for me. Another story that came out this month is Spinward, an artificial dream state novel. This is actually one of the, I've only read, I think, 1 or 2 other stories where the protagonist is female, and this is written by a female author. Sue plays the latest VR MMO set in outer space. That would be my summary of the story. It's a much bigger story, of course. It is a great sci-fi VR LitRPG story set in a really interesting MMO world. Susan, the main character, is funny. She's adventuresome. She explores the most realistic VR world she's ever seen, but runs into some of the same tropes that we see in today's MMOs. Things like gender-biased storylines, outfits on men that look fine, but on women they seem kind of skimpy. Women getting harassed by jerk gamers who are dudes, so it feels more like almost a commentary on modern gaming and MMO playing, and it's interesting and fun. And I like the fact that it is a female protagonist because it gives you a different perspective. But I encourage the author to continue writing. It's a great story. And there really just aren't enough stories written with female protagonists, in my opinion. So it's a good one. I definitely give it a recommend. The last story we have a kind of reveal on is going to be Challenge Unbound Deathlord. It's one of the only online stories that we're talking about this week. You can find it on the Railroad. Of course, the link for it is in our show notes for the podcast. Now, the story revolves around Jack, who's had a pretty bad and tragic life, and he opts to play a new, full immersion virtual reality game and enter a contest that requires him to stay in-game entirely. No checking out for bathroom breaks or eating or any of that. And not die while he's in-game at all whatsoever. So it's a very interesting mix of a virtual reality game and a contest. And it's kind of interesting because the main character is not super nice. He chooses a race that's very difficult to play. And while this is an ongoing online series, so we're not really sure where it's going to go yet, the first few chapters are amazing. I really enjoy them. They're nice, descriptive. It feels different than other adventure stories and other LitRPG series, so I kind of like it. The main character is slightly overpowered, which is okay for a LitRPG story, but it's fun. And he was also nominated for the Aspirant Award. So even though he didn't win, enough people liked his story, the author's story, that he was nominated for the first annual LitRPG Award. So good for him. I definitely encourage you to go read it. Now that's going to be it for the first episode of the podcast, guys. Episode 2 is going to be coming up very shortly. It's actually going to be our first interview we did with Aleron Kong, author of the Chaos Seat series. We did the original interview back in April of this year for the Geek Minds podcast website. in that podcast, but I'm just going to record a new intro, drop it in for you guys here on this series, so you can get the beginnings of all these author interviews that we did. Again, he was the very first one, so I think it's only appropriate that he is the second episode entirely. And it's like an hour-long interview, so it'll take the entire time for the second episode of the podcast. Now, we have a lot of other interviews at LitRPGPodcast.com. That again were recorded for our sister podcast, Geek Bites Podcast. And thank you very much for listening and watching, folks. Now, we don't have a catchphrase yet for the podcast, so if you have any ideas, please feel free to write in and suggest them to me at our email address at litrpgpodcast@gmail.com. I'm always looking for suggestions. And if anybody happens to be available or interested in maybe co-hosting this podcast with me, I always love a conversation more than just a speech, personally. If anybody loves the genre and is comfortable talking on the internets while we're recording, shoot me an email as well. I love talking to you guys. But that's going to be it for the very first episode of the LitRPG Podcast, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Ramon Mejia for the LitRPG Podcast. See you guys later, and go read some more stuff.